Okay, this demonstration is about the environments, and hopefully it's a quick, easy one for a change. Um, when you run your application, you're going to be setting up variables in the config files. Okay, now the config files live, find your installation, like here's the web root, server root, sorry, and then all your websites in there, say, and this is my local server. So I've got my Appleseas website in there, and in there is the actual root of the site where I keep the files, index, images, CSS, etc., and then the application. The framework folder with all this stuff in it. And in there is the applications stuff, and in there is your config. Okay, and when you get this downloaded from the source from the WebDNACodeSparker site, it's going to come default with these config files. Two for the generic config and two of your custom URL routing if you have any. URL routing. See the demo on URL routing for a discussion about that. But for sure you need to deal with these. These are your config files. And in the install demo it talks about how you need to set the paths. Let's open up one of these things. Okay, these are the paths that help you configure your whole application when you're first setting it up. You've got to set these right for the thing to even work right. See the install demo for that, as I mentioned. And in here, so far, there's not much. The framework is in its infancy, so we just got a few config items. You set them if you need to. Caching, see the caching demo to talk about that. Debug data, you can have your pages. Like right now, there's no debug data down here. This is, for the final display as if it's in production. But say we do want debug data, you can turn it on. See, it appears, poof. This is all the form variables and all the internal variables that I've created, text variables. And I can't remember if math variables appear in the list variables tag, context or not, but anyway. Plus custom stuff, like I've got this div with this stuff in it. Anyway, that's what the config is for. It's for these kind of global toggle things. And you can create your own. But anyway, the purpose of this demo is to explain the environments. See, the remote production file, config file, is just like the local dev one. The only difference is that you can change the values, and which one you're going to use, it depends on your environment. So like, for example, say I want my local site, see, localhost, say I want it to have debug data. So if I want my local site, Appleseas local site, to have debug data, I go to my local config, turn it on, make sure that's T. Load. Okay, and it is there. Whoops. Let's see. Say it was false. It's not there. Put it back to true. It is there. Okay. But say I want my remote site. See, now we're in local. Now we're in the remote. This is a production environment. This is real live on the server in France. Say I want this copy of the site to not have the debug data. So I make sure my remote config file, it's false. Okay, which it is right now. And because this is false, that's why there's no debug data down here. When I load a page, any page, it's not there. And my local site, this is T, and that's why it is there. So you get the idea. You don't got to keep changing this stuff. You can just set one local copy, local config the way you want it for all of your local variables, and your remote config file, set up the variables for that environment, and then all you've got to do is you just have to make sure that your index page chooses the right environment. So my local copy, this is my local copy index, I want the local dev environment. Now if I was to load the remote, I had to sneeze. If I load the remote sites index. Okay, this is just my local one, so I gotta go get the, here we go. Index, opening it up. You see, its config environment is remote production. And because of this, because this config environment is equal to remote production, in the live remote index file, that's why that site is using this config, while my local index is using a config environment value of local dev, and that's why the local site is using the local dev config. So I only have to change it in one place, in the index.dna, set up which environment, and poof, it's running off the other, the appropriate file. And you don't have to use my sample defaults. I set up local dev and remote production because that's just what I knew I needed right off the bat. But you could set this to anything you want. You could make this, testing, or, pink bubblegum, whatever environment makes sense to you, and then you can just make that config file accordingly. Name it, name it wcs_config_ whatever you stick right here. So you can have as many configs as you want. Hope that was useful and clear. Bye. Oh, I just forgot to mention, I guess it's obvious, but in the config files, this stuff is used for sure. Down here is space for you to create your own. So you can have, config things. Like say you've got a color that you use in inline CSS a lot, you can just set it here, so that it just means variable that's available all over your entire site. You could put that anywhere, but if you put it in a controller, then you got to keep moving it from controller to controller to controller. You could put it in the system, this file, but then you're messing with the system, which I wouldn't recommend unless you're going to be one of the people who develop this framework. But for just a regular end user, the best place to put variables that you want to be available globally is in your config.